Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by ARX, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I've ever seen. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly, and I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give you the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity training trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. To find out more about ARX and how you can get $1,000 off software licensing when you place an order, that's right guys, $1,000 off, please go to arxfit.com and mention Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, to get $1,000 off software licensing when you order, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. Hey friend, I'm Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that shows you how to optimize your health and get the most out of your high intensity training and start and grow your HIIT business. My former guests include the who's who in HIIT, people like Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay and Jim Flanagan, successful high-intensity entrepreneurs, researchers, and trainers like Luke Carlson, Dr. James Fisher, Adam Zickerman, and many, many more. Today's guest is one of your favorites, veteran personal trainer, author, and biomechanics expert, Bill DeSimone. But before I talk about the content of this episode, I have an exciting announcement for you. HIIT Uni has partnered with Bill DeSimone to launch a new course called Functional Training, a biomechanics approach to integrating functional training with HIIT. Functional training might be a controversial term to use in the HIIT world, and we're not saying to use one or the other approach to exercise. HIIT remains the foundation you work from, and functional training becomes an extra tool to use with intermediate and advanced clients, as well as to address physical concerns the standard routine might miss. Joint stabilization techniques presented in the course are a must to enhance muscle stimulation in intermediate and advanced clients. Adding corrective movements and stretching to the mix will address the muscle imbalances and postural deficits many individuals suffer from. Finally, integrated movements and power plyometrics can be used to create more challenging programs for athletes and advanced trainees. Concerns many HIIT trainers and enthusiasts have about functional training are that it can dilute the exercise stimulus and may even be dangerous. Indeed, in the wider world of functional training, there is much that is ineffective at best and unsafe at worst. This course by Bill DeSimone, the biomechanics expert in our HIIT community, demystifies, distills, and refines functional training, eliminating the ineffective and dangerous. What is presented is the legitimate, the biomechanically sound, joint-friendly, and workout-enhancing elements of functional training that assimilate perfectly with the HIIT model. In this course, you will learn how to use, number 1, stabilization techniques, number 2, corrective movements, integrated movements, power plyometric exercises, recovery techniques, and how and when and with whom to adapt a classic HIIT routine into various HIIT functional training hybrid routines. Visit hituni.com/FT to learn more and get 15% off this week with my coupon code CW15. That's 15. Again, go to hituni.com/FT, that's Foxtrot Tango, to learn more and get 15% off this week with my coupon code CW15. Now back to today's episode. This was a really fun conversation. I love catching up with Bill and learning more from him. This episode is really focused on his injury history. So we talk about injury prevention, strength training, and personal training in general. And we kick off by talking about Bill's severe shoulder injury and subsequent surgeries, which left him very debilitated, but gave him a whole new perspective and appreciation for physical therapy. We also discuss how to think about risk in recreational sports as you age and how to incorporate play-like activities safely into your lifestyle. We talk about Bill's experience training clients and how to talk to them to get the most out of them when you're training them. And we also talk about how to motivate your partner and other loved ones to exercise, which I know some of us find quite challenging at times. And we talk about much, much more than that. If you want to contact Bill, please check out his Facebook page, which is Congruent Exercise over on Facebook, or you can go to his LinkedIn, and I'm sure that's probably just Bill DeSimone on LinkedIn, and you'll find that. And you can obviously find all the show notes of this one at corporatewarrior.co/Bill. And now I give you, without any further ado, Bill DeSimone. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hello, Lawrence. Thank you.
Good to be talking again. It's been far too long. It's been I'd say at least a year and a half, maybe, since we actually did a podcast. I don't know, maybe it's less than that. I don't know. Time flies.
No, it might be a little longer because the last podcast we have, I don't think I had intact rotator cuffs.
No, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a year and a half since I blew up that shoulder. So it was definitely before then.
Okay. So, well, we'll get to that because I'm very keen to ask you all about that. Do you know what? I wanted to start off with this because it made me laugh so much. I was reading the Word doc you sent over to me with some of the kind of highlights of your career. And one of the things that made me laugh was your first meeting with Arthur Jones. You said you're a big fan, and he responded, "Don't worry, you'll get over that."
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? That's just so funny.
Well, that was let's see, it was some point in the mid '80s, and I was working for a company called Sports Training Institute in New York City, which had been the Nautilus showroom for the Northeast, or at least the New York area. And then at some point, I guess, turned into probably the first personal training studio. So this place we had a lot of prototypes. For instance, a couple of those double machines. It would be a chest fly and a chest press on the same machine. A side raise and a shoulder press, a pull over and a pull down, a leg extension and a leg press, all in the same machine, so that you could do pre-exhaustion and just like not change your seat, just go from one exercise to the next. Which I don't think you see around much anymore, possibly just in pictures. Because they were huge, cumbersome machines. They were gigantic. So anyway, so this place had all of this vintage stuff in it, and was slowly turning over to the newer stuff in the mid '80s. And Nautilus came out with their duo squat machine, and I believe they had it on display in the Hilton Hotel in New York City. So I ran over there one day, and I was looking at the duo squat machine, and Jones kind of walked up quietly, and he was like, cigarette in one hand, cup of coffee in the other. So I said, "Oh, hi, big fan." He says, "Yeah, don't worry, you'll get over that." So I told him where I worked, and he rolled his eyes because I guess he had some experience with them, with the owners there. And then I think, if I recall, that particular model got damaged in shipping, so he couldn't really show off the whole range of what it could do. Because the duo squat, you had you would get in the machine, and it was sort of like mid-range, and then you would straighten both legs out, and you would do one squat on one leg while the other leg held the finished position, and then you alternated. And he also had a feature in it where you could slide a pipe between the weight stack and the frame, and then you kind of worked one leg against the other, which he called either infometric or akinetic. So he couldn't demonstrate that piece of it because that was what got bent in the shipping. So it was it was brief, but it was kind of amusing, especially the "Don't worry, you'll get over that" part.
Did you see him after that at all?
No, that was about the 80s or so, mid 80s, and I think he got more involved in medics not too long after that. And then also, at the time, mid 80s, Nautilus was kind of dominant in the health club industry here. There had been a brief phenomenon of Nautilus fitness centers, which were, in effect, they were personal training studios that only had Nautilus equipment. So they only had Nautilus equipment, and you're only supposed to train Nautilus style in them. But that obviously, I don't know, within a few years, that didn't last. And then the equipment started getting, I guess they had to get it more streamlined because some of this equipment was huge and had a lot of moving parts, a lot of chains. So not long after this time, the equipment, it was mainly single station machines that started coming out.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've seen a lot of the older models. Now, I recently spoke to Mike Petrella, who's got an amazing collection of Nautilus and MedX and all sorts, but he's got some of the really old models, and yeah, they're massive. So I'm keen to. So just in terms of what's been going on with you, Bill, since we last spoke, I know you've gone through some pretty traumatic experiences around your injuries. So I'd really like to hear. I guess first starting off with, you had this shoulder injury in 2015, I think, which, as you said, would have been after our podcast, I think. So do you want to talk to us about that, how that happened? I think you were doing some kind of obstacle race or something, and then did the kind of rehab that followed.
Well, so the real injury happened in September of 2016, where I really blew up my own shoulder. And what I like to tell people is I was mountain climbing, and the person I was with fell, and I was hanging on with one arm and pulling him up with the other. I like to tell that story, or I like to tell, I was throwing a javelin, but in reality, I was covering the pool in the backyard, and I moved wrong, and I put my shoulder in the worst position you can put in to keep it healthy. And as soon as I had to yank something, and I had my shoulder in the bad position. And as soon as I yanked on it, I realized something just went wrong. So I was okay for a couple of weeks. And then one night, the pain overnight was so bad, I went to the doctor, and an exam and an MRI later. And it turned out that I had completely ruptured the subscapularis of the rotator cuff, and I had 7/8 torn the supraspinatus, and just for good measure, my biceps tendon had popped out of its groove. So what this means in terms people can understand, a lot of men, in their 50s and 60s, just from overall shoulder wear and tear, their shoulder kind of deteriorates over time, and they end up getting a rotator cuff surgery, which is usually the supraspinatus, like the small part of the rotator cuff on top of your shoulder. And rarely do people tear the subscapularis, which is the thickest rotator cuff muscle that connects between your shoulder blade, and it's between your shoulder blade and rib cage, and then it goes up into your arm, into the front of your arm. So that's the one people rarely tear. That's the one I managed to tear, which was...
that's obviously very ironic, right? Especially with your approach to safe, joint-friendly exercise. So did that occur because of, I guess, bad training in your past, like mileage from that? Do you think, why do you think, or was it just the fact that you were unlucky and you, as you said, you pulled the pool mat, was it? And just were unlucky?
I think it was just literally an unlucky break, because with the MRI, the findings on the MRI were all good except for the complete tear. So there wasn't, according to the doctor in the MRI, there wasn't a lot of wear and tear around the shoulder. I just happened to have completely ruptured that one muscle. So just to give a physical picture of what happened, do you know what a paintbrush submission is in jiu-jitsu?
I do not.
Okay, how about the stretch position of a pec fly on a machine?
Mm-hmm.
So technically what's happened is your shoulder is abducted, right? So your arm is at shoulder height to the side. Mm-hmm. And it's externally rotated. So you're like getting into the pec deck machine, and it's forced behind you. So it's a combination of abduction, external rotation, and extension.
Got it.
So in that position, that's a position like a submission in MMA. You get forced into that submission. It's what a baseball pitcher goes through. Or any kind of overhand throwing sport where you're putting your shoulder in that position and trying to exert force through it. So I had the pool cover in my hands, and I tried to lift it up to try to get some air into it. And then with both hands on it, I was turning and trying to yank it, right? Mm. So the shoulder I injured was in that bad position, and my body turned to yank it, and it was apparently I had a better grip on it than I thought, and it was stuck worse than I thought because my shoulder stayed in place and my body kept moving, and apparently with enough force to pop the muscle off the bone. So like I said, the MRI didn't show a lot of wear and tear. And actually, my first question when he said, okay, you have to have surgery, my first thing I said was, and what if I don't? And he said, well, in 6 months, arthritis will lock up your arm and you'll lose the use of your arm.
Oh, my God.
I'm sorry, let's go back to the surgery part.
How would you, sorry, just a few questions just to quickly interject. Firstly, how would you have pulled that pool cover differently now in retrospect? And did you have any pain in the moment at all?
No pain in the moment. I knew something went wrong because I felt a slithering through my joint that I'm getting far too familiar with. So it must have ruptured off clean, and then just the muscle retracts and you can just feel it, sliding through your joint. And now, let's put it this way. Now I'm very careful not to go anywhere near that position of abduction, external rotation, and extension. So, if I have to do something, manual laborish, I make very sure I do not do it without planning it, using tools, using other humans. Younger, less experienced humans, always good.
Okay, so you had the surgery. How long was that after, and how did that all go?
Well, the surgery was I injured in September. The surgery was in November, and the original plan was to do it arthroscopically. Now,
what does that mean?
Two holes, and they work through the holes.
Got it. Yeah.
As opposed to what they ended up doing, which is like a 3 or 4 inch cut that gets stitched back together and gives you a lovely little scar just to remind you not to do it again. So the original plan was to do it arthroscopically. And since the biceps had jumped its own groove, they were going to just detach the biceps and let it attach randomly, because it would have been simpler doing it arthroscopically that way. And then they were going to do a debridement, which is cutting off the injured tissue that's, like fraying or just left behind, and a decompression where they shave down parts of the bone, I guess, whatever arthritis is in there, so that you have a little more internal room in your shoulder. Now, when I came to and I realized, wait a minute, there's a big cut here, he said, well, we tried for an hour to do it arthroscopically, but the subscapularis had retracted so far, because again, it pops completely off the bone, so the muscle contracts.
Yeah.
He goes, it contracted so far towards your spine that we couldn't get it, so we had to open it up, grab it, pull it through. He goes, and then since we had you open anyway, we just repaired your bicep. We didn't detach it. So footnote that, we'll talk about that later. The biceps repair.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, so now they've reattached the subscapularis. They've reattached the supraspinatus. They've cleaned it up. They've given me more space. And now you're not supposed to move your arm for a month. So my hand was like literally glued to my belly for a good month, from Thanksgiving to Christmas. And at the end of that month, you see the doctor. He says, "Okay, move your arm." And I couldn't move it a quarter inch off my belly. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Okay, good. The surgery held. Now you just have to stretch it out." And then the physical therapy process began. But so a couple of things, there's a few takeaways for people who have to have a shoulder surgery. Number one, you got to sleep in a recliner because you can't roll. You can't put weight on your shoulder blade. What a mess. Number two, you got to use sleeping pills, because apparently every hour your body wants to change position, which you do and you don't notice.
Yeah.
But when you're sleeping in a recliner and you can't change position, you wake up. And apparently surgery-induced insomnia is a real thing. So, which I looked up at 3:00 in the morning one morning because I couldn't sleep. So anyway, so that was a fun holiday season.
Yeah, I bet. Sounds pretty shitty, to say the least. Okay, so you went through physical therapy. How did that go? Like, what did they have you doing for that to get it back to normal function?
Well, it's interesting because a few people, few people in our line of work said, "Oh, you're just going to do your own therapy." Well, and it just shows you how things get bastardized from one field to the other. When we talk about stretching and fitness, you're talking about taking a healthy joint and moving it, through an extreme range of motion. When you're talking about stretching and physical therapy, you're talking about getting your hand off your belly. Literally, that's what we did for the first few weeks, was them manually trying to get my hand off my belly and just to get a passive range of motion around the shoulder. So that's actually a lot more painful than I just made it sound.
So, okay. So what specific things were you doing, to enable you to move normal again?
Well, the first few weeks, you literally get a hot pack for 5 or 10 minutes, and then they massage around the joint for about that amount of time, and then they literally just start to stretch it in different directions. Now, and I'm not doing justice to the whole process, because I just had to avoid gritting my teeth too hard and yelling.
Oh, wow.
They had to do the actual planning, the actual thinking. Now, what was also kind of interesting. And so, another funny thing is all of us personal trainer types regularly used to make fun of physical therapy because we'd see them doing this, what we thought was like this silly, climbing your hand up a wall exercises and, exercising with the pink and purple dumbbells and these little elastic bands. But it takes on a whole different context when your joint hasn't moved for 6 weeks. And I'm like, I have a whole new appreciation for the process of physical therapy now. I've been around it for a long time, but this is the first time I was actually the subject. And it was very enlightening. Again, the joint itself was just so tight, which was the whole goal of it, that most of the first probably 2 months it wasn't exercise at all. It was literally just moving it and stretching it. Now, one thing that was especially demoralizing was, so again, my hand is plastered to my belly now, right? Mm-hmm. With a sling. And then first it's with a sling and then everything literally tightens up because the subscapularis by itself creates internal rotation at the shoulder. All right. So that muscle's been repaired, but now it hasn't moved for 6 weeks and it's, clenching tight. So what starts to happen is, now your shoulder rolls forward because that's the direction the muscle's locked in. And then I noticed the muscles on the back of my shoulder, like, stop fighting. So they just gave up because I guess it's a waste of energy for the body to try to hold its posture under those circumstances. So now the rear delt, and tricep kind of disappears. Then the scapula starts to follow the shoulder, so the traps on that side kind of atrophy, right? And now, since your shoulder's completely rolled it forward with the scapula sliding forward, also, now you're getting a bit of a kyphosis, and now your neck is going into because now you don't want to be looking at the floor, so now your neck starts to get extra curves in it. Okay. And then, as if that's not bad enough, you can't really swing your arm when you walk. So your coordination is completely thrown off. You stumbling into things. You can't get any speed when you walk. And then even though during the process I was trying to at least ride a bike during the physical therapy process, I couldn't hold any muscle tone or any waist management whatsoever. And one day the therapist says, "Oh, did you have a productive weekend?" And I said, "Funny you should ask that." I said, "No," as I'm exhausted. And he said, "Well," I said, "You know what? I have a friend of mine replaced his hip and another friend of mine replaced their knee. They're not as exhausted as I am." And he said, "Well, it's because your body's trying to repair. You didn't get new joints. Your body. It's the same stuff. It's just trying to repair itself." And it seemed to me like holding muscle tone and like holding like a tight waist was just energy my body just didn't have. Now, fortunately, months later it came back, and I don't know if anybody looking at me now could tell the difference, but that 6 to 9 months afterwards, that was an eye-opening experience.
So you saw, okay, now that's really interesting because I'm sure I bet it must make you appreciate. I don't know if this is true, but it sounds like it makes you appreciate function over aesthetic. I think
I was upset about the aesthetics.
Yeah, no, sure.
You don't spend 59 years looking a certain way, and then all of a sudden it goes to hell.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's slightly different. But I think about this a lot because obviously, as you know, I play basketball, and every time I go on the basketball court, I'm taking risks, and then there's the chronic, the long term potential issue with that. And, what's that saying? Is it Arthur Jones that said you don't care how big your bicep is when your lower back hurts or something like that?
Well,
I think
it's true.
Yeah. So it's like, it makes me think about these things. And I know you were quite unlucky with your injury, but it makes me think about, reducing the sport, or maybe not playing sport at all, which is obviously a pretty controversial thing to say these days, might sometimes be in our best interest. So that's kind of what I was thinking when you were going through that. So how did you, I'm assuming.
Well, hold on a second.
Go on, yeah.
So about that point, right? So about age 40 is when people start to notice like a decline, right? And I'm sure there's some bodybuilder listening to this who's jacked up on steroids claiming, nope, I'm in better shape at 40 than I was at 20. Okay, fine. Good for you. But for most people, 40 is like the marker when you start to notice physical ailments that weren't there before. Now, about 10 years earlier, I started playing softball after not playing for like literally 25 years. And the first season, every single game, I would pull a hamstring or a calf, right? And I mentioned it to a physical therapist friend of mine, and he said, look, take that as a warning. He said, I have a lot of patients, 40-ish, athletes in college, stayed in shape, stayed doing their sport, and one day they move wrong and they rupture an Achilles tendon or they rupture an ACL. So he said, so if you're pulling your calf and pulling your hamstring, that's very close to your ACL and your Achilles. I said, you know what? Good idea. So I shut it down for a season, went back, played one more season, and I said, you know what? I'm cutting this a little too close. So pretty much put the glove away. The thing that's going to limit you will be the catastrophic injury.
That's it.
So, you can either keep playing until that happens and then back off, or you can just kind of, like I know some of the guys on your side of the ocean play like walking soccer.
That's true.
Which I know you're right, people have that reaction to it, especially when you're in the throes of competitiveness. But, sports are tough because if you have that competitive streak, common sense goes out the window. And you're either going to back off voluntarily or you're going to back off because you can't, because you get injured.
Do you know, it's funny. Yesterday I was playing actually, and I had a moment where I was just like playing really well and just thinking, and I actually thought in my head, God, this feels great. And then I thought, I thought about what the guys are telling me in the Hill Fit Facebook group and what you probably told me about the risks. And I just thought, you know what, it's worth it. But that's because I'm saying that because right now I feel totally healthy. I wouldn't be saying that around Christmas last year when I tore my calf,
Right.
Which basically meant I couldn't walk for 5 days without crutches, which was very debilitating. And I was miserable during it. So it's funny how our perspectives change. Now, this is really cool because I wanted to touch on this. I'm glad we're kind of discussing this. But how do you then reconcile the whole, you want to go through life, you want to be happy, you want to have fun, you want to be able to play, and you want to potentially be able to play sport. I mean, how do you think about this stuff in, where you are in your life? How do you think about that, and how do you meet those needs, or do you just not have those needs? I don't know.
Well, no, I think that's a legitimate question. So, for myself, in 2013, I went out and got a blue belt in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and I really liked it because it's the mirror image of the biomechanics that I use in training. But I also could tell though that, and even though I could kind of hold my own, I could tell that younger guys who maybe weren't as interested in technique as I was, were kind of dangerous, and they might be flailing and throwing elbows and stuff. So it's tough enough I got to manage my body. Now you got to manage the opponents, the guy who you're supposedly practicing with. So I kind of gave that a bit of a break. And then I just kind of decided that, time to do something else. So I don't know about over there, but over here, half marathons are kind of like the trendy thing to do. and I have no aspirations of doing a half marathon. But a 5K is a manageable. 5K is like 3 miles. That's a manageable distance to train for without being excessive. So in my head, I said, all right, my goal for my 60th year, I want to be able to do a 5K in under 30 minutes. So last year I was able to do them in like 39, 38 minutes. And for runners, that's not a big deal. For runners, these are, runners are doing this running on one leg. But for me, not having run for most of my allegedly athletic career, it's a manageable goal that I don't have to spend excessive amounts of time training for. I don't have to do anything too, like a marathon would kill me, or a half marathon. That would absolutely kill me. There's no way I could do that. There's no way I could survive the training for it, much less do it. But like a 30-minute 5K, at most you're training for it an hour, a couple of times a week. That I can handle. And I can kind of get my competitive yayas out in a relatively manageable, manageable event. And every now and then I'm tempted to go back to the jiu-jitsu or some other martial art. And then I look at the sling that I nailed to my wall, and I look at the scar on my shoulder, and I'm like, yeah, maybe I could lie down. That feeling will pass. So anyway, it becomes a question. I think it does become a question of directing that urge into something that's a little more manageable. I really enjoyed the jiu-jitsu because, like I said, the biomechanics of it were the exact opposite of what I was trying to do with the weights, which I found fascinating. And they didn't, it was just their techniques that evolved over time, but I could see the biomechanics reasoning behind it. So I was fascinated by it. And I had wrestled when I was in high school, so I was better on the ground than if I tried to learn it. Like I've tried to learn it with other adults have tried to learn how to compete on the ground as an adult, and it's much tougher that way than when you've done it since teenage years. So I did like it. I got a lot of satisfaction from it, but practically speaking, not worth it.
Yeah, I remember Steve Maxwell talking about this because he's
a much bigger deal than I was in it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But he's obviously a fair bit older than you, I think. And I remember him saying that, he still rolls with people, but he's very selective. He'll only roll with someone who is very cognizant of the things you're talking about and that focus more on technique than toughness and strength and power, so as to avoid getting injured, which I thought was quite smart. So perhaps that's one workaround if you find the right partner. Perhaps.
Well, yeah, the group I was doing, the group of guys I was doing it with, that is what we had. We had a bunch of people who were just emphasizing technique, and every now and then someone would invite themselves in and, one of these I never tap guys, which is a terrible way to learn this type of technique. You have to learn the technique before you can actually be competitive at it. So that is a way, that is a way to do it. To your larger question, you just have to modify. You have to kind of redirect your thing into the thing that's not going to, blow out an Achilles or something.
But you think you have to have something, is your point. Is that right?
I know I have a competitive urge in me. So I got to have something I'm working on. So whether it's a 5K in 30 minutes or 60 push-ups in whatever, just doing 60 push-ups, some little manageable goal, some goal that's not so over the top. That and the point is, by the way, the process of the goal, not just doing the goal.
Yeah.
Like I helped support a local half marathon. So I was on a bike helping round up stray runners at the end of the race, and some of the people at the very end of the time frame, like right pushing the so-called like the slowest time they would allow, were in a horrible shape. I mean, just dying. And I say, listen, the SAG van is right here. Do you want to get in? You had a good workout. And they'd be like, no, I got to finish this. And I said, well, how'd you train for it? And they said, I didn't train for it. You didn't train for it. I mean, just doing the half marathon isn't the point. It's the preparation that counts. So I guess if you have a bucket list, and you have to cross things off at any cost, okay, but I'd rather set up to me it's got to be something you can train for. I mean, it's the preparation, it's the whole process that counts. I remember also in the mid 80s, not Sports Training Institute, but another company I worked for decided we should volunteer for the New York City Marathon. So we did the medical tent for 2 years, and 1 year we were at the finish line. And that duty was great because that's where all the cameras are and all the TV cameras are. And so unless you were like almost dying, they just slapped a Mylar sheet on you and sent you across the park, right? Nobody went into the medical tent at the finish line. The next year, we were at the medical tent across the park. And it was a horror show because the people, now their body has realized when an insult has been placed on it, and they've walked across the park after running 26 miles with this Mylar sheet on them. And by the time they get to the medical tent, their body decides to get rid of every fluid imaginable, from blood and worse. And it is a horror show. So early on, it dawned on me, only run a marathon if you are really supremely ready, because this is not worth it.
Yeah, I have like no interest in doing something like that, to be honest. I've done my fair share of obstacle races in the past. But yeah, I mean, perhaps something shorter, maybe a 5K like you were talking about, but not marathon or ultra endurance. Although, obviously I've spoken to people like Andy Magnus, and I have enormous respect for him. I've spoken to Laval Saint-Germain, who's even more extreme and, rode from Canada to Europe and climbed Everest without oxygen and all of this stuff. And I do really admire the feat, and I do see the value in it, and the value in terms of feeling more grateful for the simple things in life. I'm going a bit off script now because I know we're talking more about how to incorporate play and sport into a life that's safer. But maybe these are just fulfilling different needs, but at just a much greater risk. Well,
just to bring that back to fitness stuff. I mean, I've heard your interviews with Andy Magnus, and I've seen him and others like that talk elsewhere. But they don't pretend that what they're doing is what everyone should be doing for fitness.
That's right.
Like, they acknowledge that, yeah, this is a little bit extreme. It just happens to be my thing, which is, fine. That's your thing. I mean, you can't argue with it. If that's the thing that gives you some satisfaction, more power to you. But before we get too far off the shoulder, there's one big takeaway, a point I really have to make. So I tore the shoulder in 2016, September 2016. But as it happened, I had banged it up doing an obstacle course in September 2015. Okay.
Right.
I had banged it up bad enough that as soon as I did it, I felt nauseous and broke into the cold sweats. Okay. Now, at the time, I didn't know that if I had torn it bad enough, you had 6 months to repair it, or you'd lose the use of your arm. I just figured I banged it up, and so I iced it and did my own rehab exercises. And after a year, it seemed to be okay, and I was back to training regularly. So I could tear it at the pool. But when the doctor said, well, 6 months, if you don't repair it, you would lose the use of your arm. Well, it had been a year since I banged it up the first time.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me in that year that you could lose the use of your arm over it. So my advice to anybody who gets banged up like enough so that you notice, don't gut it out. Like, go to the doctor just to rule out the catastrophic thing. Like, if I had gone to the doctor in September of 2015, they would have said, well, you separated your shoulder, do these rehab exercises, take Advil, blah, blah, blah. And that would have been fine. But it never occurred to me that if I had ruptured one of the rotator cuff muscles, that you had a 6-month window to repair it. So, word to the wise, if you think you banged something up, get it checked. Even if you disregard the advice, like if they say, well, go for physical therapy, but you just want to make sure it's not the type of thing that's really going to affect your life afterwards.
Right. No, that's good advice. Are you back to training regularly now, normally, for your shoulder?
Pretty much. But really, ridiculously strict form. I think at some point I could loosen the form up. I thought I was training strictly before. Now I'm really training strictly. I just find that, like, if I give even the slightest, breakdown in perfect form, and my shoulder's barking for days. So, I have to play with other things. In order to get that depleted feeling, I have to do other things. I have to do another set, or play with the time of the set, or the time of the rep. Simply going heavier and more intense, that's not going to work for me. My margin of error is much smaller.
Yeah.
So,
and what's because I noticed looking at a document you sent over to me, you kind of summarized your kind of training style, and I know there's probably some flexibility in this for your clients and what you recommend, but it sounds like you kind of believe that the best, well, again, you might want to correct me on this, Bill, but the best approach is to have strict form or good form and fall slightly short of failure in that first set. One set or multiple sets. Do you want to just elaborate on how you think about an ideal protocol for most people?
Well, for myself, I'm not pushing to teeth gritting, vein popping intensity anymore. I'm being very, very aware of, how the joint is stabilizing while I'm lifting, and so that there's no shifting or no compensating. I still want the depleted feeling that you get from training to failure, but I have to do it different ways, whether it's, lengthening the set, or doing a second set, or again, playing with the timing. I do think it's a little tough to take a beginner and to get him to train that precise from the start. So, if I'm training a beginner, I'm going to be a little more forgiving of the form. Not to the point where they get hurt, but I'm going to be a little less precise, just because to convey this, that sounds like nagging. Like, you don't want to be correcting somebody on every single rep.
Yes.
So what I tend to do when I'm training other people is I'll explain it or demonstrate it one time. The first couple of reps, if their form isn't so bad that it's dangerous, I'll let it go. Like, I'm not going to nitpick at every little discrepancy. When the form starts getting harder, then I may start with a couple of corrections here or there. But in general, like, the person's got to feel some progress. The person has to feel like they've worked out. Because if you insist on this super precise, fussy form, they may just go elsewhere. this doesn't feel like a workout. It's too much nagging. It's, if I wanted to do yoga or Pilates, I'd go do yoga or Pilates. Anne-Marie and Greg Anderson, when we used to talk about this stuff, we'd say, like, if you're too obsessed with form, you can't push the person hard enough. And, in some cases that's probably true, right? I think I probably have what I'm going to get from weight training, I probably have gotten already. Right? So I'm probably not getting 18-inch arms at this age. I'm probably not getting the Frank Zane V shape with no waist at this age. I've probably gotten what I'm going to get. So I still want that. I still want that feeling of having worked out. I still want to look like I do. I still want to look in shape, so to speak. But for me personally, more importantly, my joints got to function. That was not a fun winter of having to recover.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a balance where you as a trainer have to exert some judgment between being super anal about the form and letting it turn completely to crap. You have to kind of I think people, like, even when we were doing the jiu-jitsu, if we were teaching something, the first couple of times through a move, you just get the basics right. We'll work on the nuances over time. Just get the basics right, because if you get bogged down in the nuances right away, it's like too much information for the person to handle. If you cover the broad strokes and then refine it over time, I personally learn better that way, and I personally think it works better that way.
This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, ARX. Are you looking to create a cutting-edge, high-intensity training facility? Are you confused on what equipment to use or how to separate yourself from the masses? Well, then ARX Fit might be the answer you're looking for. I asked Mike Polano from ARX a few questions about how ARX machines are challenging the status quo of the exercise industry around the globe. Mike, if you could, give the listeners a quick summary of why ARX is so different from the traditional machines or tools they're used to seeing in most exercise facilities.
ARX is totally different than anything you've seen before. This isn't just another weight stack machine. We've looked at the last 40 years of exercise technology and used that knowledge to create something entirely new. ARX uses a new form of resistance, a motor, and we pair that motor with computer software so that we can maximize the safety, effectiveness, and efficiency of your workouts. So you may be asking, okay, but how does ARX compare to weights? Traditional machines you see in gyms today are based on lifting metal weights and battling gravity. What people don't realize is that when you're forced to lift a static weight like this, one that doesn't adapt or change while you use it, you're underloading yourself rep after rep. And this unnecessarily limits your ability to make improvements. With ARX, we've taken a totally different approach. We removed weights and gravity from the equation altogether. Instead, ARX combines our patented motorized resistance with our custom computer software to provide you with the world's safest, most effective, and most quantified form of resistance training ever. When you train with ARX, you are training to your perfect level of resistance, both positively and negatively 100% of the time. No more guessing what weight to use. ARX does all of that for you, instantly and automatically. We'll also track and measure every second of every rep, so you can quantify all of your workouts to find out if you're improving and by exactly how much. Whether your goals are bigger muscles, increased strength, stronger bones, or just to look good in a bathing suit, ARX can help you achieve all of these and more, but do so in a fraction of the time it would take compared to traditional equipment. If you're looking for the most efficient, most effective, and most quantified piece of exercise equipment on the market today, then look no further than ARX.
Thanks, Mike. That all sounds really impressive. If you'd like to learn more about ARX, visit arxfit.com and mention that you heard about ARX on the Corporate Warrior podcast to receive an exclusive deal of $500 off shipping and installation off your ARX machines. Yeah, I love this because I was actually introducing someone to kind of like to strength training or high intensity training very recently, and I put him through as a friend of mine, and I put him through kind of like a big 5 workout, and it immediately occurred to me that I probably know way too much that he doesn't need to know, like at this stage.
Yeah. Yes. That's right.
And I'm starting to say stuff, and I'm like, I can see it in his eyes that it's just he's glazing a little bit. So then I'm like, okay. And I actually really like how Discover Strength approach this, because they're very deliberate about this. They will sit down with their client beforehand, find out their interests, their goals, and will then drip feed them info that's very much related to that and that will resonate with them as they train, but not overwhelm them, which I think is excellent because it's tailoring the experience to them. And and to your point, he was a bit all over the place in some cases in form, not in an unsafe way, but he wasn't perfectly stoic and in perfect position all the time and moving with the right smoothness. But again, I'd corrected him a little bit, but then I would kind of pull back and say, no, you know what? This is the first time you've ever done this in your life. And just the fact that you're doing this and you're using a high degree of effort is amazing. So as long as you're safe, then this is all good. And we'll go from here,
And you refine it, even as just a trainer, not trying to teach the guy, you just refine the form over time. Because otherwise it's just too frustrating. Like I kind of stumbled onto this literally 20-something years ago. And I was training a friend of mine who happened to be a physical therapist. And then I was a little tight on time. So I said, put me through a few exercises, since they're in the gym anyway, put me through a few exercises. And it was really interesting because she turned around and used the exact same verbal cueing and instruction that I was using, which I said, oh, this is very interesting. We had been trying to teach trainers how to instruct. And instead, by treating her as a client, she just kind of absorbed it. Like instead of telling the trainer, say this at this point in the set, by just training her as a client and saying something at a certain point in the set, she just absorbed it. And then when it was her turn to train, it just came out of her, without really belaboring, without giving the person a long list of items to do. That was my first thought. My second thought was, God damn it, that is annoying. Far too many words. So I immediately cut down the amount of words I use by about 2/3. And really, seriously, beginning the set, as long as they weren't going to kill themselves, I didn't nag. Right. And when the set started getting harder and now they're getting a little bit weaker and now they are getting to the point where they might hurt themselves, now I'll coach a little bit more. Now I'll say, okay, don't lock out your elbows, stop the rep over here. Don't bounce off the bottom. But not on every rep. If you do that on every rep, you just drive the person crazy. And it's well intentioned, but it just isn't. I had to be on the receiving end of it to realize how annoying it was.
That's so cool. I actually train my girlfriend once a week, and a lot of people hear that and think, "Oh God, how does that work?" I'm not sure if many couples do that, but I train her, and early on in that process, she said to me, okay, can you just shut up? But because what she wants me to do, she's been very explicit about it. She's like, I want you to tell me when I'm doing it wrong, but I don't want you to use motivational words and things like, unless she's right at the end and she needs maybe me to say, come on, you've got another rep in you, don't give up. But I was being like talking constantly. So to your point, I have learned from that experience, and that was a little bit of a hit to the ego. But hey, I'm not a personal trainer full time, nor do I have any qualifications yet. Although I'm obviously partway through the HIT Uni course, which I should have finished ages ago. But other priorities have taken the forefront. But no, I will still be doing that at some point or completing it.
Well, let me tell you about training wives and girlfriends.
Right.
So when my wife and I first met, I would tell you when, but I want to tell you how old she is. But and we're the same age, so So when we first met, the Nautilus centers were very prevalent. And so she would work out with myself and some friends of mine. And we were training full-on Nautilus Mentor type training. And she did also. So for a few years we did that, and everybody was in shape and fine. And then, life settles down, has a couple of kids, gets out of the training habit. And while this is going on, she says to me, how are you earning a living as a personal trainer? Once you show somebody what to do, what do they need you for? And I said, yeah, I don't know. It's a rich people thing. What can I tell you? Anyway, so 10, 15 years goes by, and I notice among my clients, the older women, they're developing like the kyphosis and the frozen shoulders and all, and the exercise isn't really helping because it's gotten too set in their bones. So I say to her, you really should start working out again, not to stay in shape or for muscles, but to protect your joints. She says, yeah, you're right. So a month goes by. Did you work out? No, I didn't. Okay. So she goes, you know what? Why don't you work me out one time just to get me started? Fine. Work out one time. A month goes by. Did you work out again? No. Okay. She says, you know what? Why don't you work me out for 2 weeks just to get me started? So I work her out for 2 weeks. A month goes by. Did you work out again? And she says, I'm only going to work out if I have an appointment with you at the studio and I stop by on the way home from work. I said, what happened to what do they need you for once you show them what to do? And she said, shut up. And that was the last we've ever spoken about it.
So she still trains with you, right?
So she still trains with me. Yes.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, that's cool.
we just never talk about that whole what do people need personal trainers for again.
Yeah, I get that. Whatever works, right? It's kind of finding out what will, because that's the thing. I know a lot of people who, are really into their strength training. A lot of listeners, even guests on the show, whose partners and wives do not train, and husbands, I should say as well, and boyfriends. And it's a real issue, I think. There's periods where my partner hasn't trained for a long time, and I know it gets to me because the more and more you learn about strength training and the benefits of it, the more you become, evangelical about it, and you want everyone to do it. And it's hard because you start seeing, oh, well, is my partner going to become one of those people who isn't looking after themselves and therefore is going to be high risk of all these different chronic diseases and issues further down the line, So I don't know. Do you think about that much? Do you have those conversations much with people about stuff like that?
Well, my wife, my daughter, my son, none of them are into this at the level I've been at. But they do enough to stay, quote unquote, in shape, which is really the whole point. Not everybody has to, not everybody has to get in completely up to their eyes in it, immersed in it. So if they just do what they need to do, that's fine. I've wondered that myself. Every now and then you see an in shape. One of the couple is in shape and the other one is clearly not. And you're like, wow, it's
odd.
That's a significant difference. Now I remember when my son's 28 now. So when he was around 12, he says, show me what this weightlifting stuff is about. So we have some stuff in our basement and I show him what to do. And, the next time he goes to work out, I follow him down. He goes, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to help you work out. He goes, no, I got it. I said, okay. So a few weeks later, I snuck down while he was working out. And sure enough, he was using the exact form I showed him. And I realized, oh, interesting. Without other people around him working out, it doesn't occur to him to do anything other than the one thing I showed him how to, the form I showed him.
Yeah.
Then he went to college, and the first day of college, he calls me. He says, I'm in the gym right now. He says, what the hell are these people doing? I said, they're doing a bunch of stuff that I didn't show you how to do because at some point it's going to hurt you. And he said, "My God, people are going to destroy their backs and their shoulders." I'm like, "Yep,
That's so cool.
Well, that's what makes me sell books."
Yeah, no, that's well, it's great that you had that influence. You clearly did it in the right way, because obviously, a lot of parents find that I don't know, that their children will often do the things they're not supposed to do because they turn into rebels, or they want to do the taboo thing, or what have you, or they're more influenced by those external forces. So that's quite cool that he was you use those sort of critical thinking skills, and obviously there's lessons you taught him. I've got a whole load of questions here, which were probably, actually, you know what? I've just realized the time. So actually, I want to move on to some things I really want to ask you, Bill, just quickly, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I've got to ask you this one. So what is it that you, if anything, that you and Dr. Doug McGuff disagree on?
Doctor Who? I don't think I haven't heard of him. No. Based on, first of all, I don't really read, unfortunately, I don't read a lot of exercise books anymore. So I'm not really sure where his current thinking is at. And I think if just going by, say, Body by Science, I think Body by Science, that the 5-set routine I like minimal places to start, sort of what's the buzzword? The essentialism. Mm-hmm. I like starting at a very basic level, because if you have to adjust, you have somewhere to adjust. If you start doing 25 exercises, you don't know what to adjust. You don't know what's working right, what's working wrong. So I think based on Body by Science, I'm probably a little more open to doing cardio exercise and stretching, maybe more of the rehabilitative exercises than, I might be doing more internal rotation and overhead pressing, for instance. So there might be some differences if you compare written word to written word. But the difference between what Doug does in the gym and what I do in the gym, and what Adam Zickerman does in the gym, and what Luke and Discover Strength do, the difference between us is not nearly as great as the difference between any of us and the CrossFits or the boot camps of the world. So, like the differences between what Doug does and what I do is probably more in the category of nuances than in serious, headbutting type conflict. I don't think you're going to catch either of us slamming a sledgehammer on a tire as part of a workout, or flipping a tire, the wrong way. Maybe there might be some minor differences in the range of motion we use, mm-hmm. right? I think compared to, say, other HIIT people, because I used to do this myself. I used to push to the point of gritted teeth and, veins in my head bulging and that type of stuff. And I no longer push that way. So, not having seen people work out a lot, it's hard to say exactly where the differences are. But I suspect the differences aren't as pronounced as it might look on paper.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I know Doug obviously respects you enormously and has learned a ton from you, and I'm sure vice versa. You reminded me of something. I was listening to your interview on Informed Fitness, or both your interviews actually, which were hilarious, by the way, and very, very good.
Okay.
I think Adam's doing I mean hilarious in a good way. Like, I wasn't laughing at you, but I think Adam's doing an amazing job with that podcast, and I'm recommending a lot of those episodes on a frequent basis. But I've just added something to my buffer account to push out on social, and it's I'm quoting you, and you said two quotes I just were great. One was you were talking about, how do you try and get better at bad movements, and you just said practicing bad movements doesn't make you invulnerable to the bad movements. You're just wearing out your free passes.
I truly believe that.
Yeah, for sure.
I
yeah,
absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
You're not getting used to it. You're getting away with it.
Yeah. And then the other one, which just came to mind as you were talking about hitting tires, is regarding functional training in air quotes in CrossFit. Frankly, if I have to move a tire from point A to point B, I'm rolling it. I'm not flipping it. And I just thought that was genius. And I mean, it's obvious, but like, it's just so funny to hear you say that. And no, I encourage listeners to check that out because that was good.
There's an American commercial where, and I don't even remember what the product is for, but first you see this big jacked guy, heaving and grunting and shoving a tire, across the landscape. And then next to him is some skinny guy with terrible posture rolling the same tire much faster with much less effort. And I was like, oh, that guy. Bringing up functional training, it's an easy thing to roll your eyes at. I just took a 8-hour workshop for continuing education, and I specifically took the functional fitness specialist one to kind of see what is actually being put out there.
But that was
in
difficult.
The personal.
It was in order to sit through it. I mean, is that fair?
Oh, it was. It was a challenge. My notes are covered in curses. And there is some useful information under the broad umbrella of functional training. That the useful stuff, I think a lot of the HIIT protocols miss, but much of it is awful.
What are some of it? What is some examples of that useful stuff?
Well, like I said in congruent exercise, right? The good stuff under the functional training umbrella draws a distinction between the muscles that move joints or move limbs and the muscles that stabilize joints. And I think a lot of HIIT protocols don't acknowledge that at all. So for instance, rotator cuff exercise or things to stabilize the spine. The conventional HIIT program doesn't really address those things except very tangentially. So if you're a HIIT person with that model as your base, there is things you can use to meet what your clients need that you can pluck out of the functional training realm that are useful. And I also think they match the appropriate biomechanics and anatomy. But most of what you see on the functional training is the really loud, gross movements that they put in beer commercials now, and that stuff is just silly. I mean, you can't do that and be protecting your joints at the same time.
Yeah, no, good point. I do really respect how you keep an open mind about this stuff, though. I think a lot of us are guilty of just ignoring the throwing the baby out with the bathwater in this type of example.
Well, the problem here is that the phrase functional training is all over the place. I mean, it's like the cellophane that you get stuck to your hand and you just can't shake it off. So now even mainstream articles or mainstream magazines or newspapers that cover anything having to do with exercise feel obligated to throw the phrase in there, even though what follows is utter gibberish. The problem is the uninitiated potential client you may be talking to is at least aware of the phrase. So if you go into a tantrum every time you hear it, you're just going to turn that person off. They might just be genuinely inquiring.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because I think a lot of people in high intensity training have this issue where they're so vexed for good reason about the health and fitness industry that and so vexed about, I guess, the malpractice and the ambiguity and cliche that's about now, that they probably do kind of bash heads with clients and prospects on terminology and definitions and things like that. Whereas sometimes you have to be a little bit more diplomatic if you want to have a successful business, as you often talk about and have mentioned here. Yeah.
Because now, like, a lot of hit influence guys are still hung up on, barbells versus machines. What's better, machines or free weights? That's a 40-year-old argument, man. Nobody outside of hit guys care.
Yeah.
Or high volume versus high intensity. That's no one care. Your prospective client wants to know, can you help me get in shape without killing me? That's what they want to know. They don't care about machines or free weights. They don't care about kettlebells versus MedX. Can you help me get in shape? And oh, by the way, I read an article on functional training. Do you do functional training? You can either, quote, educate the client and go into your rant about how stupid it is, or you can say yes and do what you were going to do anyway.
Simple.
You say yes.
Much less friction in the latter.
And do what you're going to do anyway, right? I mean, I might argue. Well, I wouldn't, but I could see arguing with a boot camp fanatic who's insisting that's the only way to get in shape. That person I'll argue with, but the non-combatant who's a prospective client who's just repeating what they read in the newspaper because they don't know, they don't have the vocabulary. I'm not going to argue with that person. I'm going to, yes, we do that, and get on with it. That's all.
Now, before we wrap up, Bill, I mean, I realize, like, we've kind of gone all over the place with this conversation, which is fine, and it's been a lot of fun. But we can. So the thing with you is I can really go deep on a subject. So I'm going to bear that in mind for some future stuff we do together potentially. But my final question for you before we wrap up, and I guess get your details and catch up on the book, is what, and I know you love this question, is what have you changed your mind about since we last spoke, or in recent memory, about exercise?
Well, definitely I have a whole new appreciation for the process of physical therapy. So maybe not everything physical therapists do, but I definitely have a new appreciation for a client who says, I had this injury or I had this surgery. I'm no longer. I mean, I wasn't trying to fit round pegs into square holes before, but now I have a completely new appreciation for it, just because of my own rehab and injuries and such. And another thing that is apropos in the HIIT world is, the whole idea of carpet time, where you've worked out so hard you have to collapse on the floor.
Yeah.
Now, this is kind of interesting, because I noticed I had in earlier days, I would put the barbell or the machine down and end my workout and get on with my day. And I was fine with it. And I noticed the last few years of aging into decrepitude that if I would do that, by the time I would drive home, I'd be pretty lightheaded and really not feeling well. And I thought it was not enough carbohydrates or not enough water or something. And it might have been your interview at Wayne Westcott, and I remembered some stuff he had written for ACE many years ago in, like, some of the early personal training textbooks. So I dug him out, and he wrote a lot on the importance of warming up and cooling down. And I knew that. I just put it out of my head. And I think what happens is, even though the physiology is solid, you don't notice the consequences until you get a little bit older. So specific to warming up and cooling down, what he had written, and other people's other writers confirmed it. What he had written was that your body shunts a lot of your blood away from your internal organs to your working muscles. Okay. And then it has to shunt it back. So if you just start right away and try to lift your heaviest weight, it's not going to work as well because that blood has not gone to the working muscles yet. So the purpose of the warm-up is to start to redistribute the blood. Again, when I was younger, that just did not connect with me. As I've gotten older, I find, oh yes, if I warm up, I do better in the weight workout. And on the other end, on the cooling down part, if you stop working out too abruptly, the blood is in the working muscles, and it has to go back to the internal organs. If you stop too abruptly, you end up on the floor, because that's one way the body's going to get the blood to the working muscles is by making you stop. But it's not a pleasant process. And what he had suggested years ago in these personal training textbooks is like a 5 or 10 minute walk on the treadmill or bike ride at about half of your working levels, which was just a way of gradually assisting the body into reapportioning the blood. Like I said, when I was 25, I didn't notice it. When I was 55, I noticed it. So I think the physiology is sound. I think you just don't notice it until you get a little bit older. And now I'm older, so I notice it.
You remind me of, I remember Doug telling me ages ago about, you're young right now, so it's not easy for you to know how much recovery you need between workouts. But trust me, when you get older, you know.
You know something? Yeah. I know people roll their eyes when I say that I don't read other trainers' stuff. And I don't mean it to sound arrogant, but age and biomechanics and physiology wins. Do you know what I mean? So the Mike Mentzer style workout from the 1970s, the 4-day split that I could try to mimic when I was 25. You know something, 30, 40 years later, I simply can't push that hard. The joints give up, not the muscles, not the motivation. Age and, like I said, the actual biomechanics ultimately wins. So, you can do the gonzo stuff while you can, but at some point it's just going to outlive its usefulness.
Well, just on some of that, you talked about warm up. I think a lot of us in high intensity training are kind of taught that as you start your first exercise, because you're moving at a slow rate, you're not obviously moving so fast in the beginning that you're going to injure yourself. And then those first few repetitions kind of form the warm up. And obviously, as we know, the heat that the muscle generates when you work out, your temperature picks up very, very quickly. So is it not, can we not just use that as the warm up? Are you saying that that's not enough? Really, one should do some kind of separate warm up before the workout commences?
Well, I was familiar with that thinking, and it was a very creative way of trying to work around it. But, going back to that 70s material, Darden used to include almost like not Tai Chi, but it was almost like a Qi Kung type warming up where he was going through all the joints and having you literally move all the joints in an organized fashion before doing the Nautilus circuit. And I was familiar with that, the first 4 reps of your warm-up stuff. And again, when you're 25, I guess it works. But I noticed that, a 5-minute warm-up on a cardio piece or even just a 5-minute walk, and maybe, depending if it's a big exercise, maybe a warm-up set, I find the work sets do go much easier. Now, again, your mileage may vary. But it was easy to write that stuff when they thought the person was going to work out for a year. I'm working out 46 years.
Yeah.
I don't think in the 1970s, when Jones and Mentzer and Darden were younger also, they envisioned people working out almost 50 years. And so their observations at the time might have been accurate at the time, but I don't think they were training 60-year-olds with new shoulders.
Yeah. That's a good point. I just remember a few years ago being back in London and training at Physical Culture, which is a gym in East Putney, which is like East Central London. And I was trained by Paul Wiley, who's probably quite well known, I imagine, by a lot of the high intensity training community. He's certainly one of the UK community. And I remember he got me on a cross trainer to begin with. And I kind of, said, what are we doing?
Right.
And at that point, I was probably a little less open-minded. But he was like, I just like to do this. And I'm like, okay. And then I just kind of gave in and was like, let's do it. And, obviously it was no downside to doing it either. So, but yeah, no, you're making me think, and I'm sort of thinking about my own workouts and I'm thinking, I think maybe a brisk walk or maybe some light exercises might actually be ideal. So I might actually start throwing that in.
Well, the one of the early weight training texts called Progressive Resistance Exercise from the 1940s, classic 3 sets of, I have a copy of it.
Who wrote it?
Who wrote it? Oh, DeLorme and Watkins.
Okay.
So this is like the original, medical text on weight training. And it, by numbers, it says 3 sets of 10 repetitions. The first set is 50% of your working weight. The second is 75%. The third set is 10 repetitions. And when 10 repetitions is easy, add weight and all the numbers climb up. But they also say in that, only do the warm-up sets if they don't interfere with the work set. And so if the warm-up sets are too vigorous, cut it down to 1 warm-up set and get right to the work set. And even Mensa used to write, basically warm up as much as you need, but don't let it interfere with the workout. So, there is some dueling studies. There is some hit. There is some solid hit reference for doing some kind of warm up. And again, if it's not interfering or it's not like, I wouldn't warm up for like an hour. You don't want the warm up to become the workout. But I think you might, again, the older you get, the more you notice the work sets go easier that with the warm up than without. It'll go easier. You do better on the work set, however you want to look at it.
And again, to me, it's like I've kind of become, as I go through my own exercise journey and learn more about this and do more and more podcasts, I have become more. What am I trying to say? I think that less of what I thought matters actually matters, if that makes sense. So in this context, like, it's not going to do anything bad. Like, you know what I mean? So why not? Like, there's no downside to warming up. So
right now, I agree. The Hutchins stuff, the super slow material from the 90s, whatever. If you're talking about running a marathon, yes, that's going to interfere with things. But so there is a certain amount of reacting to the hype or reacting to the extreme and coming up with a blanket recommendation. So I wouldn't want to do an hour of cardio, for instance, as a warm up. That's definitely going to interfere. Plus, you're going to sweat all over everything. That's disgusting.
Exactly.
But again, we're talking about 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, and you'll know that when you do your first work set, if it feels easier having warmed up than not having warmed up. Again, not easier that you're not going to train hard, but I'm just saying, it'll just, maybe you can focus a little bit better. Maybe there's a little less aches and pains that you're working out in the course of the set. A lot of this stuff is very individual. You just have to try it.
Absolutely. Bill, this has been a lot of fun. I've used up way too much of your time, so thanks for being a good support. So you've got this book coming out eventually. I don't know if is it out yet? I mean, you've taken ages and we're all waiting to read it. So when's it going to be out?
I'm not a professional writer, right? I'm
What?
I'm not a professional writer. I'm trying not to write clickbait. So, and then I tend to get distracted by life. So
there is that. I will be the first one to purchase. So tell us more about the book.
So at the moment, I'm calling it Joint Friendly Fitness, your guide to the optimal exercise program.
Nice.
Mainly because all the good names like the Nautilus book and the Arnold Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding were taken. So since all the good names were taken, I figured I have to go with, but anyway, but the heart of the book is I looked at 75 exercises. I ranked them 1 to 5 stars based on how easy it is to manage the risk of those exercises. And then I took each exercise with 4 pictures, or actually there are 4 drawings now, but they will be 4 pictures showing the extreme start, the extreme finish, and then what I would consider to be an optimal start and an optimal finish. And the reason why I did it this way is, if you come off like the exercise police, right? If you only, like in congruent exercise, I included 20 exercises, right? Which kind of implies something about the ones I didn't include, whether I intended it or not. So what happens if you don't have access to those exercises, or if you have a pet exercise that I didn't include? Well, then the material I'm making available to you is only so useful to you. So I figured if I looked at 75 common gym exercises, both machines, free weights, body weight, and if I ranked them 1 to 5, that kind of tells somebody at a glance, okay, this is a 5-star exercise. This is going to be pretty cut and dry how to do it safely, versus a 1-star exercise. Well, okay, let me see what he has to say about this before I put the barbell on my back and try to do jumping step-ups on a bench. Let me see what he has to say about this. And that way I thought it'd be a little bit more useful, right? For instance, somebody might only have access to a so-called 1-star exercise. So at least if you know what the concerns are, where the risk is, you can try to manage that risk, which I think is more useful to people than simply saying, just don't do that exercise. Because invariably you're gonna attack somebody's pet exercise and they're gonna, shut you down. Yeah. So just to give an example, like a barbell step up on a bench, I ranked as a 1-star exercise, and in the text I explain how very tough it is to manage the mechanics of that. Not to mention at the end of the set when you're fatigued. And by the way, it was the exercise that crippled 2 American college football players. So you really have to weigh whether it's really worth doing, whether the magic benefit you're going to get from that exercise is worth the risk. So that's an example of a 1-star exercise. A 5-star exercise would be like a Nautilus Nitro leg press, which can support the curves in your back, and you can adjust it front and back, and you can adjust the back angle. So it's really cut and dry how to do that exercise safely. And then a 3-star exercise would be a barbell squat, which very common. Sometimes it might be the only option somebody has. And with a couple of workarounds, you can manage the risk at least. So that's what I did for these 75 exercises with, at the moment, they're hand drawings. They will be pictures for publication.
And when is the publication date, Bill?
Well, I got to get a couple of models in shape to take the pictures, like me and a few others. So hopefully we'll be able to wrap this up. I've got most of it written. Most of it's in words already. And I do want to have a more polished presentation than congruent exercise, and definitely more than moment arm exercise. So I do want to get connected with a professional photographer and somebody who can help with the layout. Just because I think this is the most useful thing I can put together. So I don't want to put it in a format that's not going to reach the people who would benefit from it.
Yeah.
I don't know about yourself, but I know, like, for instance, I know if Darden writes something, I pretty much guaranteed will buy it and read it. And as it happens, I've really liked his last several books, and I really thought a couple of them in particular were really brilliantly laid out. I thought they were very easy to read and got right to the important stuff.
Yeah.
And there's other guys whose books I'll read because I know them or I've met them. But if it's not laid out in a way, if it's laid out like a novel where it's border to border, single spaced words, and it's hard to match the diagrams with the words, it's a bit of an obstacle for me to get through it. So I really want to put I want to put some time, not just into the words and how I'm presenting them. I want to make sure it's laid out in a way that, if somebody wants to sit down and read it all in one sitting, great. But I also want to be able to take it to the gym or into their home gym, quickly flip to the page with the exercise they're going to do, get the high points of what they need to do, and they can use it that way as a reference, not just as a like a straight read through.
Yeah, I like that. No, I really enjoyed moment arm exercise and congruent exercise. And I remember you saying how you want the books to become more and more lay as they advance, because obviously moment arm exercise was pretty technical, and even congruent was slightly more simplified, but still fairly technical in some places. So I remember you saying before that this is going to be the simpler evolution of that.
Do you have Planet Fitness over there?
There is a gym called Planet Fitness, but I'm not sure if it's part of the same chain that you're talking about. I think they just stole the name.
What we have here is, we have the occasional studio like your guests have, and then you have the health club industry has kind of turned into a maybe up to $20 a month membership type place. It's also the type of place people go and they drop out from because they don't know what they're doing. They don't really offer instruction. They might offer equipment, but not a lot of instruction. Those are the people I want to reach with this stuff.
Right.
Like, I think the people who read moment arm exercise or congruent exercise will be able to read this stuff deeper, because when I get past that exercise section, I am going to elaborate on the biomechanics, but it's not going to be part of the exercise section, right? So if somebody just wants to say, okay, what do I do with this exercise? They can turn to that page and look at it. And if somebody wants to say, and why did he say that? Well, then they can go in the back of the book and read the more elaborate explanation.
Because that's even someone like me who's probably a little bit more well-read than your average. I'd really like that, because sometimes I just want a quick reference, as much as I'm into the knowing the why and the how. I sometimes I just want, because basically I'm just saying that I personally would find it very useful too. So.
But something, if I go into the bookstore, like a real actual brick and mortar bookstore, if I pick up especially an exercise or a martial arts book or something off the shelf, if I can turn to a page and get a chunk of information that's useful, I'm likely to buy the book. If I open a book and I got to hunt to match the diagram to where it talks about it in the text, and if it's single space text, small font, border to border, I'm only going to find that so useful. So, like I said, a couple of Darden's last books, I thought whoever laid them out, man, I am ripping that guy off, because I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, I liked the new high intensity training that he wrote. I did enjoy Body Fat Breakthrough. I had a few issues with it, few bits, but for the most part, it's still a great book. Like, it's still, I was kind of trying to look at it like, if someone just picked this up who didn't know much about high intensity training or strength training and exercise, it would be very valuable. And they very cleverly pepper his testimonial.
I thought his discussion of the evolution of negatives, I thought that was great.
Oh, right. What? And the avitogen hormone thing?
Well, not that part. But I mean, the evolution of, how they first started, how he was first using negatives, and what the pitfalls were, like taking too long in between reps, and then, going through X-Force and then coming up with the 30-30-30 stuff. I thought that stuff was really, really useful. While we're talking about books and bookstores, let me skip ahead to that question. You say, what books are you reading? Or
sure. So you tell me, what books you recommend reading right now?
So this is very interesting because when I was doing moment arm exercise 15 years or so ago now, right, I really had to work to get through the anatomy and kinesiology and biomechanics textbooks that I found on my physical therapist friends' bookshelves, right? It was really dense stuff. And now, as I'm looking to update my references, in the actual bookstores, you got things like biomechanics for dummies and kinesiology for dummies. So I picked them up and I'm like, wow, this is pretty good. I mean, this is the kind of summary I wish I had 15 years or so ago, where it's readable. The information is kind of chunked so you can grasp it. It's not written like a textbook. There was another one called The Pocket Anatomy of the Moving Body, right? This is about 5 inches by 5 inches square. It's like a brick. And the text is on the left side. The diagram it relates to is on the right side. And it's chunked in a way that, again, it makes it very readable. You can flip to the piece you need, get what you need to get. You don't have to sift through line after line of technical data. There's another one out called The Hidden Mechanics of Exercise. And this is all within the last couple of years. Again, this stuff is so much more accessible than the stuff I was looking at in 2001 and 2002. I have no idea who's reading this stuff. Certainly not the people you see in commercial fitness, as they're slamming things and throwing things. But for people who want to get deeper into like the science of this stuff without getting a formal degree in exercise phys or, sitting for the personal training certification, these things are great. I was really impressed with how accessible this material has become.
Very cool. That's interesting. I might actually look out for those. Certainly put them in the show notes for the listeners. And I think you were quite descriptive in the names, so I'm pretty sure we can find those and put those in there. Bill, what's the best way for people to find out more about you and get in touch?
I think the Congruent Exercise Facebook page is the most useful. And if people are reluctant to go back on Facebook, I think possibly LinkedIn. I have to start exploring that a little more and paying a little more attention to what's happening there. But those are the two places where I'll update stuff and I'll put excerpts up. And I think putting excerpts up is the best way to get exposure for some of this material. Like I say, give a chunk of information away free. Yep. As a way of whetting people's appetite.
Yeah, giving value for free is huge. And I think a lot of people don't do it because they think that they're giving away their products for free, but people still buy it because then they trust you because they value what you're putting out, and then they will buy it. And I don't think a lot of people understand that in our industry.
Good. What everybody else who sells books should do is guard everything as precisely and as tightly as possible. Don't let anyone know what you're doing unless they pay you a lot of money. That's what everybody else should do.
No, and Bill, make sure you tell me when the book's out because I will push it everywhere because I'm really keen to read it myself and promote it because I think you're doing great work. So
thank you. Trust me, you'll know.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Let's wrap it up there. So for all of the listeners, if you want to get the blog post for this one, please go to corporatewarrior.co/Bill. And to find a full list of podcasts, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook to get a bunch of goodies, including number 1, a free ebook of podcast transcripts with some of my top guests like Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill DeSimone on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. Number 2, a free high-intensity training business checklist to help you get more clients in your business. And number 3, a free high-intensity training Google Sheet to help you track and improve your training progress. Head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook now and enter your email address for instant access. This episode is brought to you by ARX, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I've ever seen. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly, and I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give you the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity training trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. To find out more about ARX and how you can get $1,000 off software licensing when you place an order, that's right guys, $1,000 off, please go to arxfit.com and mention Corporate Warrior in the How Did He Hear About Us field. So again, to get $1,000 off software licensing when you order, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did He Hear About Us field.